Hey everyone, welcome to the Totally Well Show. I'm your host, Joyce Strong. The Totally Well Show is a place where we get curious, ask questions, and explore everything to do with health, wellness, fitness, personal development, helping people, and all the things it takes to help you live a strong, joyous life. My guest is Dr. Debra Kimless. She is a medical doctor, anesthesiologist, and I'm going to read to you what she has written on her LinkedIn so that you get a really good feel for what she's all about. And today we talk about CBD, but in a certain very specific context. So Dr. Kimless writes, I'm passionate about educating physicians, patients, and the public to destigmatize cannabis so they understand that it is a real, safe, and effective medical therapeutic choice. Building on my background as a boarded anesthesiologist with subspecialty certification in pain medicine, I have spent the last several years immersed in all aspects of medical cannabis. In addition, I recently became board certified in lifestyle medicine, a specialty which I have been practicing for over 10 years. Focusing on scientific and medical applications for the treatment of patients, I have traveled the world to present my case studies and clinical trials, including in Israel and the Netherlands, 2 countries with best practice models for medical cannabis. I love sharing my knowledge through speaking to influencers about the endocannabinoid system, medical applications of cannabis, methods of administration, and why it matters, as well as cannabis as a harm reduction tool. I have firsthand experience successfully treating patients with a variety of medical conditions using an individualized treatment plan, including diet change and combined with cannabis. So that's a bit about Dr. Kimless, Dr. Debra Kimless, and I'm sure we're going to have more episodes because she is such a wealth of knowledge and a great resource for me. She's really helped me to understand the integration of whole food nutrition with this medical treatment, with cannabis as a medical treatment, and how important it is for us to destigmatize the use of cannabis, and even the word with all the slang terms that we use. And growing up like my age, it was, called all kinds of things other than cannabis of what it was. And there's a lot of politics that go into that and stuff we won't get into today. We kind of touch on it in the show. But all that said, I can't wait to introduce you now to Dr. Debra Kimless, and stay tuned for more episodes. I hope to get her on as a guest again, and also encourage other people to help her spread the word so that we can destigmatize cannabis and really study it and learn how we can use it as a medication. Enjoy the show. Hey, Dr. Kimless, it's so nice to see you today.
Thank you so much, Joyce, for inviting me to your podcast. I'm really excited to start our conversation.
Yes. We preambled a little bit. We talked on the phone the other day about CBD, and that's how I learned about you. And I was really surprised to hear that there's so much more to you and why you got into CBD in the first place. So I was wondering if we could start there with telling my viewers a little bit about you, where you were, and how you moved into an interest in CBD and cannabis.
So I'm a physician by training and debt, and I'm a board certified anesthesiologist, pain medicine specialist, and now lifestyle medicine. And throughout my multiple years of study, internships, residency, and tens of thousands of CME hours, I never learned about a lot of things, including cannabinoids. I never learned about the endocannabinoid system. I never learned about proper nutrition. I never learned about a whole host of things. And so in 2005, I started questioning what we've learned, what was the rationale behind our education, and what was missing. And so that's where I started trying to figure out about nutrition and about lifestyle, and how actually that is a huge, important factor that most of us are missing as a foundation for health.
Did you have something happen with you in your life, your own personal life, that got you interested in or questioning nutrition? And
So when I was 13 years old, I started questioning what we were eating because I just didn't feel good.
yeah.
I wasn't heavy, I didn't have a disease process, but I felt like, gosh, at 13, I should have energy and vigor and run around. And I just felt like I could sleep a lot of the time.
Hmm.
And my mom and dad were marketed to, according to eating.
Hmm.
And we did a lot of fast food and a lot of animal products and a lot of processed products. Um, and I just wasn't feeling right. And so I actually went to this thing called a library, and I started doing research about nutrition and understanding how diet and movement and meditation and things could be helpful. But it
Hmm.
really wasn't clear, especially at 13 and pre-internet and didn't have my own money, how to do this. So my rebellion of sorts in when I was 13 was I stopped eating refined sugar and red meat,
Yeah.
which was huge in my family. That's what we survived on. So it was a very interesting challenge, and I kept studying and thought that I would actually pursue something like this in medicine. My life, like everybody else's, takes its twists and turns, and I went into anesthesiology instead of nutrition,
Yeah.
which was fine because it gave me a foundation for understanding a whole host of other physiologic issues. But in 2005, I thought I knew it all. I thought, gosh, I don't eat refined carbohydrates and I exercise and sometimes I sleep and whatever. And I ended up with a diagnosis of breast cancer.
Hmm.
And my dad had his chest cracked with a quintuple bypass,
Hmm.
and other people in my family were getting weird autoimmune diseases.
Hmm.
And we were kind of young and we were kind of active. And even though some of us were related, most of us weren't, except by marriage or whatever. And I'm like, but we are related by what we're eating.
Yeah.
And so that's when I did my other deep dive, this time on the internet, thankfully, and found a whole host of these whole plant, they call it plant-based, but I call it all plant, no added oil, no processed food, physicians
Hmm.
and researchers.
Hmm.
And the research actually is out there since the 60s.
Wow.
And yet government has done a lovely job of sort of keeping that stuff hidden from common access.
What
And
do you
when
think
I,
that is? Why do you think the government's doing that?
because I think that the government is supporting different food things like the women and infants and children, the WIC program. If you look at what the foods are, it's milk and cheese and dairy, which is all highly toxic and poisonous
I was
to,
on the WIC program many years ago.
what's that?
I was on the WIC program many
Yeah.
years ago.
And so did you, see
No,
those types of foods, right?
yeah, I didn't know better then. Yeah.
No, nobody does. I mean, think about what we were trained. You're a nurse, I'm a doctor. Think about every nutrition course that we've ever learned. It was usually about, on a cellular level, how these micronutrients interact within a cell, but nobody steps back and goes, wait a minute, we're more than just single cell organisms. We actually have to eat.
Yeah.
How do we do this? What does this mean, this food? And it's interesting because culturally, we are fed by the people that love us the most, right? Our moms and our dads and our grandparents and family members. And they learn how to eat through culture, which
Hmm.
is like hundreds of years.
Hmm.
But food technologies have rapidly advanced, even though it's hundreds of years and we're mere mortals and we don't look at that as a short period of time, but evolutionarily, it really is a blink of an eye.
Yeah.
And our bodies just haven't figured out how to adjust to this rapid advancement in this food technology. I'll give you an example.
Hmm.
Crisco that comes in a can
Hmm.
is 108 years old or 109 years old.
Yeah.
So that's embedded in our culture, or many people's cultures,
Yeah.
that it's okay to use that. It was made for shelf stability, period. It wasn't made for the benefit of our and the health of our bodies,
Hmm.
right? So it was a huge, eye-opening, head-rocking realization when I found this out. And I say this tongue in cheek, but I really mean that. I had many sleepless nights going, holy smokes, what I've done to my family, what I've done to myself, what I've done with educating patients.
Yeah.
You know, my word matters. I've
Yeah.
got, powerful initials behind my name, and I took it really seriously. And when I discovered that this was not accurate information, that perhaps it was being promoted by people who are lining their pockets financially, I was destroyed, really.
Yeah.
And so
I struggle with that because the more I know, the less I feel I know. Just you and I having this conversation the other day, and then I'm like, oh, I've got to pivot again. I've got to keep, and I'm just taking it. I'm just like accepting it now that I'm going to do day to day the best I can and be willing to have an open mind and shift and say, I used to think this, but now,
right.
Yeah.
And as information evolves,
Yeah.
like, we just aren't given, brilliance. Things evolve over time. And what we believed was true maybe, 10 years ago, 50 years ago, maybe not so much now. But even if you look at 50 years ago, 100 years ago, people didn't eat the way we do now. They don't overconsume animal products and dairy. So even if they did have a little bit of those products, it wasn't 98% of their dietary intake every day like it is now.
Right, right. Even the timing, I've been seeing a lot of people posting about time restricted feeding, intermittent fasting, like it was just invented.
Right. Oh, no, that's what we did when we were foraging, right? We didn't have time to sit down for 3 huge meals a day.
Right,
Right?
right. We had priorities. We needed to get shelter. We needed to count all our children, make sure they were all there and nobody got eaten last night.
That's right. Make sure the woolly mammoth didn't stomp on us.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
So I actually started helping patients get healthy with diet change alone.
Right.
So a whole food, all plant, no added oil, no processed food diet. And the results were remarkable. They really
No
were.
animal protein at all?
No animal protein. We're not carnivores. Animal protein really is about a plan B. So if you're stuck in the gulag, in the winter and there was no vegetation and you didn't plan ahead of time because you were put there by some government as an arrest, whatever you could eat, of course, for survival makes sense.
Right.
But if you look at a true carnivore, which is a cat, guides, where they have certain physiology to deal with handling meat. And then you look at us, we're completely different.
What about things like eggs? Is that also not?
So I call eggs liquid chicken, so it's liquid chicken. It's not good for us.
Yeah.
Eggs are made to grow bigger chickens or roosters or whatever you get from your genetic,
We
crap.
see a lot of people with sensitivities to eggs. If you look at like somebody like Dr. Wall and removing eggs from the Wall's protocol. Yeah.
But eggs also are huge in cholesterol and fat, contributing to obesity, contributing to heart disease, contributing to cerebral vascular issues. God doesn't spare blood vessels. So if your heart's filled with cholesterol, all the tiny blood vessels are also struggling. So higher risk of stroke, peripheral vascular disease, all that kind of stuff. Again, we've been marketed to by an industry that only makes money if we eat eggs.
Yeah, yeah.
And there is actual science out there showing eggs, doesn't do a body good, and in fact can contribute to diabetes. I mean, it's not good what we're learning. We are learning our nutrition and how we should live our lives through the media. And those spin doctors are not real doctors.
Yeah.
So
speaking of being marketed to, this whole thing with cannabis and CBD has concerned me. I think I shared with you that I'm teaching a class and we'll be doing more of it. And I really don't know that much about cannabis yet. I know more than a lot of people, and because I've been studying so hard. And my biggest concern is the dangers involved with just it being the Wild West, and with products being out there, who knows what's really in it, and misusing, and also just financially being taken advantage of because people are just not understanding enough. So I wanted to get your take on that.
So just a little, I'm going to take a step backward real quick and
Yeah.
say 2013, my eyes then were open to understanding cannabis as a medicine.
Mm-hmm.
And I started doing a deep dive research regarding that lie as well. And, unfortunately, up until 1941, cannabis was actually in our US pharmacopoeia.
Mm-hmm.
My grandfather was a pharmacist.
Mm-hmm.
He probably actually compounded, some elixirs or some tinctures for
Mm-hmm.
patients. I'm imagining,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
it wasn't until Prohibition in 1941 when alcohol came off Prohibition, and I guess the feds needed job security, and then started a whole new Prohibition. Did cannabis be taken out of that?
Wow.
And part of that marketing schema was that it was no longer called cannabis, it was called marijuana, and
Right.
there for a whole bunch of reasons that is beyond the scope of this conversation. But I would like your listeners to look at a book called Up in Smoke. I'm sorry, Smoke Signals. No, Up in Smoke was Cheech and Chong. Smoke Signals by Martin Lee, who's a wonderful, wonderful journalist.
Yeah.
And Martin Lee actually looks at the social rationale behind the vilification of cannabis.
I'll
But
put that in the show notes. Yeah.
yeah, once you get beyond that and understand that cannabis is a medicine,
Mm-hmm.
and that sadly that prohibition really created a bunch of problems for us all in our knowledge base
Mm-hmm.
and the ability for our people to get educated regarding it.
Did we even know about the endocannabinoid system in 1941?
We did not. So in 1941, we didn't have that understanding. The elements of the endocannabinoid system really weren't discovered until the late 80s, early 90s
Wow.
by a bunch of really, really smart scientists that in the 1940s started all of their research, believe it or not. In fact, CBD was characterized in the US in the 1940s. And then in Israel in the 1960s, they characterized THC, and they started doing research collaboratively, by the way, funded by NIH.
Hmm.
So out of our tax dollars,
Wow.
just not in our country,
Yeah.
or not mostly in our country, looking and trying to understand this. But the weird thing I find is that I understand things evolve.
Mm-hmm.
Of course. Um, why isn't it now being embraced in nursing schools and medical schools? Because to this day, less than 14% of medical schools even teach the endocannabinoid system. The endocannabinoid system is our own system within our own bodies. It's a real live biologic system,
Mm-hmm.
and its purpose is to basically govern all of our other biologic systems. In fact, life as we know it would not exist if we did not have an intact endocannabinoid system.
So when you say govern our other systems, are you saying like our thyroid or our endocrinology or?
Yeah, all of the above. It is, which is why people, and it's literally no different than other sort of plant medicines.
Mm-hmm.
Plants is not a single drug, single target.
Right.
Cannabinoids and cannabis is not a single drug. There's over 400 different chemicals in the plant.
Mm-hmm.
About 100 or so are specific to the cannabis plant. The
Mm-hmm.
rest of them are found in plants from all over the plant kingdom,
Mm-hmm.
and they all work cooperatively together in this balancing act, working within our entire bodies called the endocannabinoid system. So endo comes from the word endogenous.
Yeah.
Cannabinoid comes from the word cannabis, or cannabis-like chemicals that our body actually makes.
Mm-hmm.
And plant chemicals interact with our own bodies in endogenous system to try to balance and provide health benefits.
It sounds a lot like food. What I think of is the way food works. Is that accurate or similar?
And, and that's how I really was blessed to start. I like to liken it as a grayscale. So I started understanding how plants, how whole food, all plant, no added oil, no processed foods interact with our body's biologic systems to improve us, to
Mm-hmm.
make us healthy, to provide a foundation. And then when that foundation still needs a little help,
Mm-hmm.
herbal medicine is the next step because it's natural and the risk benefit ratio is generally a lot kinder and gentler than an isolated single molecule.
Mm-hmm.
And cannabis fits in that sort of therapeutic pyramid.
All right. So where would your first step be to bring cannabis into the picture?
So it depends on what we're treating.
Okay.
This is a medicine. It's a potent medicine. Just because it's natural doesn't mean that it's not used with caution. I mean,
It's
foxglove,
not like broccoli. It's not like a vegetable that would eat.
it's a neurochemical and it interacts with neurochemistry for sure. As does food, but in a different way.
Okay.
But um, digitalis comes from the foxglove plant. You wouldn't just, consume that without concern. Cocaine is naturally occurring. We wouldn't want to recommend doing that without, some guidance and specific rationale behind it.
Mm-hmm.
So it depends on the patient and depends on what their disease process is. It depends upon the goals and benchmarks. So for everyone that I treat, I make them change their diet
Yeah.
or I don't take care of them because without an internal milieu of being as ready as it can be to
Mm-hmm.
then have other, potent medicines being introduced, I think one, you're ending up using a lot more medicine.
Mm-hmm.
You probably aren't getting the maximum benefit from it,
Mm-hmm.
and it's expensive.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So, so I change everyone's diet before I do anything. And then we sit together and we define what is it that we're trying to help?
Mm-hmm.
What are our goals? What are the metrics for measuring those goals?
Mm-hmm.
So everybody's different. But in cannabis medicine, because our endocannabinoid system is a balancing act
Mm-hmm.
and it's our only neurochemical so far that we know. So as of, December 2019 and the knowledge that we know now, it's the only neurochemical that actually is made on demand,
Mm-hmm.
used locally, it's rapidly broken down,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not stored.
Okay.
Because of that, and it's such an important thing, I recommend teeny tiny amounts. I like to call it a microdose
Yeah.
of cannabis medicine
Mm-hmm.
so that it can activate the endocannabinoid system. We can slowly titrate it up.
Now, when you provide cannabis or recommend cannabis, do you have or do we just as in science have the ability to, what's the designer, like have certain cannabinoids, more of one cannabinoid? Because I know there's many in
Right.
terpenes and all of the different cannabinoids. Can you get a plant or process that CBD or that hemp oil? I'm not sure exactly what to call it, but can you
So it's
customize it to
hard.
the need?
So, yeah, so it's hard because this was the one of the negative adverse effects or the negative side effect of prohibition, right? Is
Mm-hmm.
that this is still federally illegal
Right.
and that it's only because of states' rights and robust, highly legal, legislated, and regulated programs do patients even have access. And so, depending upon your geography
Mm-hmm.
and maybe even your job, will determine whether or not you even have access.
Right.
Yes. And to me, it's a human rights issue. And it makes me so incredibly angry
Mm-hmm.
that this medicine isn't federally legal because it would then allow for prohibition obviously to be lifted. to
Mhm.
have it being regulated, to answer your prior question, to then make sure that patients have access to safe medicine,
Right.
and make sure that patients have access to medicine that's tested,
Mhm.
that's quantified, that's standardized, so that if something works for them, they can go back and have it repeatable.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this is sort of the horrible thing about this prohibition is that, you know, patients getting taken advantage of. Maybe they're buying medicines that don't have anything in it.
Yeah.
Maybe they're buying medicines that have pesticides or heavy metals in it.
Yeah.
So this is the problem. And the biggest problem I have with this is that in 2003, our US government has a patent
Mhm.
on cannabinoids as a anti-inflammatory and neuroprotectant.
Wow.
Okay, this is 2019.
Mhm. Wow.
If our government knows this, why don't we have global access?
Yeah.
Like I don't get it. Think about it. Um if a patient has a stroke,
Mhm.
right? And they have an area, a discrete area that was injured. Unfortunately, that's not the only area that gets injured because as the cells die and
Mm.
spills the contents and the chemicals that are contained within a cell, and it that like the ripple effect, sort of like
We
when you
talk
drop
to the
a
neighbor.
stone,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It injures other cells and other cells and other cells. And so actually that stroke that could have been very narrow
Yeah.
actually gets extended. It's called the penumbra, right?
Okay. Mhm.
There is actually no drug to prevent that penumbra.
Mhm.
Cannabis could be that drug.
Wow.
Could you imagine since 2003,
Yeah.
the government that we've paid for has a patent
Yeah.
and we don't have access to this? It's
That's
insane. And I think it's this reefer madness fear
yeah.
that cannabis equals inhalation and getting stoned,
Yeah.
getting intoxicated.
Yeah.
And that's not cannabis medicine,
Right.
you know? And cannabis medicine requires all of the things, all of the constituents, so that you need less of them,
Right.
you know? And none of the patients that I talk with and help get stoned or get high or get intoxicated.
Mm.
Why? You need the receptors in the brain. Yes. So we do have receptors in our brain that interact with the cannabis plant, as evidenced by the reason why people have wanted to inhale this forever, right?
Mhm.
And then you need the drug to sit on those receptors,
Mhm.
but you need enough of that drug to sit on those receptors.
Mhm.
And if you don't have a lot of that drug sitting on those receptors, you're not going to feel intoxicated.
So
You may,
if so with the CBD, if it's under 0.3
no, that's
THC,
THC. Yeah.
and is it still giving you the entourage effect that you're talking about if it has that?
Actually good. Sure. CBD with zero point 0.3 or less of THC, and it's not milligram, it's percent,
Yeah.
which is any time, may be enough for certain people for certain indications.
Yeah.
And the reason why CBD is so popular is because, the WHO just came out with a paper saying, there's no adverse effects, there's no chances of, or the reduction of adverse effects. There's no chances for addiction. There's a lot of positive.
Mhm.
That doesn't make it a panacea.
Yeah. Yeah.
And all it does is sort of open the door to understand that if you are one of people that can actually respond to this, that's a great thing.
Mhm.
Not still all of the cannabinoids from the plant and the terpenes and the flavonoids and all of the other things that are found in that plant, we actually should have access to.
Right. Right.
We're paying for the research. We should have access to it.
Yeah. It's such a fascinating field. I want to honor your time. We're over our 20 minutes. I promised you we would keep under, and we could talk forever. I have so many questions, but I think this has been a really good start for me. I feel a lot more confident knowing what you've taught me so far, and helping to introduce people and let them understand the foundation, the background. So I'm so appreciative of your time and all the work you've done.
And I'm appreciative of you and your time and the work that you're doing. And, you learn and then you teach. Sort of the medical adage of, watch one, do one, teach one.
Yeah.
And so brava that you are embracing this because, and doing these types of podcasts for educational purposes, because it's so important, because there is no traditional educational platform yet. And
Yeah.
I'm hoping as more and more states recognize the same things that we've recognized, that actually this is a pretty potent medication, used carefully, that, hopefully the federal government will say, you know what, you're right. We can open up our doors and stop this prohibition. Because prohibition does no one any good, right? Hence
Right.
that
We need the
vaping
information.
issue.
Yeah.
I like the vaping issue. That comes out of not because of cannabis. It comes out of the fact that it's, we're not regulating it, we're not studying it, we're not understanding it. People think that vitamin E acetate is okay. Well, maybe not so much for smoking.
Right.
Maybe only for eating.
Well, I think the prohibition just encourages those kinds of things to happen because it all goes black market, and there's
Yeah.
people don't even want to talk about it anymore. So the fact that we're talking about it is
Exactly. So thank you
yeah.
for doing this and taking your time and resources that can be used elsewhere and generating, focusing it here. I think it's great. Thank you so much.
Dr. Kimless, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
All right, take care. And if you want to continue at 2.0, I'm here for you.
Awesome. I would love to.